Welcome to everyone to this interview, and thank you so much to Matt Schmucki from AstraZeneca to participate in this session. My name is Toni Manzano. I'm the AI and Operations Team Lead in the AIO Xavier University, and I'm gonna make some questions to Matt that has participated in the two sub-teams during this year. Let me make the first question, Matt.
Yep, absolutely.
In the AI and Operations team, we worked in two different threads. The first one, the roadmap of AI, has developed a maturity model describing different stages of organizations adopting AI. AstraZeneca, and especially your team, have demonstrated a notable maturity sharing the data of agglomeration process with the AIO Xavier University. How would you describe the bureaucratic process for the data session? And which was the most complicated step?
So lucky for us, the business process for this was pretty straightforward. So like many pharma companies, we often partner with other research and academic organizations. So we already had a non-clinical data transfer agreement, and that was one of our standard legal documents that was readily available. So this document actually identified the data that would be shared with AI Xavier University, what it can be used for, who owns it, and it was an agreement between the two organizations. In terms of the most complicated step, so this was a new process to me, so figuring out who had to actually review it and who was able to sign off was new, so it took some chasing around to figure out who could do those type of things. But other than that, it was really straightforward. I had to list out all the data, so luckily we had a clear business problem defined, which then guided us to which data was needed. Without having that clear business problem, I think there could have been some circles where, oh, I forgot to get this data, so let me go do another agreement, and we could have gotten into a circle there. But luckily we had a well-defined case and understood what data was needed to address it.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we succeed at the end. We succeed with this journey.
Yes.
And the second team in the AI in Operations Task Force is the development of AI. In this team, we worked with AstraZeneca data following a virtuous workflow that was defined in the roadmap of AI, the first team. So data acquisition and data cleanup is one of the first stages in the journey once the problem scope was identified, as you mentioned before. Could you explain your experience during the data collection process?
So there weren't too many issues. The approach I took was on a highly automated process line with years of clean stored data. So what I bypassed any type of program, went straight to SQL, ran a simple query for all the parameters during the date range specified, and was able to export that to a CSV file for Toni and your team to use. We also included release data, so that would have been in a LIMS system. So I was able to export that, and we have the batch number to join as a key, so that was very easy as well. So we had one merged CSV file. And then in terms of cleanup, the only thing I had to do was, in terms of like privacy concerns, I changed the parameter name so it was a more generic title, and instead of using batch numbers, we just had a unique ID assigned to each batch. Mm-hmm. So minimal cleanup. It helps when all your data is already in a clean SQL database.
That's great. During the data cleaning process, after applying an initial set of algorithms, we realized that there was a misunderstanding with the data. We identified the problem when the AstraZeneca process experts and us put in common the first insights. What do you think, Matt, about to don't apply the classical rule in the AI discipline that says anonymize the variables before start?
For sharing purposes, especially when we're going external with an academic institution, I think the variables still need to be anonymized to some extent. In our case, it was mostly removing specific tag names. So instead of having the tag name in the motor, I called it mixed speed 1 or something like that. Specifically, the issue I think we ran into was understanding the relationship between the variables. So there was some context that was missing. So if, for example, if we our dryers for all the different suites they have the same label. They're dryer 1, dryer 2. From someone outside the organization, the data does not indicate that dryer 1 on line 1 is physically a different dryer than dryer 1 on line 2. So from a data perspective, dryer 1 looks like dryer 1 and all the lines share it. But in reality, each line has its own dryer 1. So there was definitely context missing. But I definitely think there needs to be some type of anonymization that occurs when sharing publicly. So it's finding that balance of how do you make it anonymous while also maintaining enough context for the SMEs, the AI SMEs, to use the data correctly.
Mm-hmm. The balance is always the secret.
Yes.
During the journey, applying different AI algorithms using the AstraZeneca data, we asked to you and your team some extra support. For example, creating categories of batches in order to transform the non-supervised algorithms into supervised algorithms. Or, for example, we requested your support in order to measure the quality of the models by means of a confusion matrix. Do you think that the effort made by your team has been rewarded by the results?
So with the results, while we're still searching for the specific root cause of our issue, the results gave the team a new way to look at the data that we wouldn't have gotten to without using AI. So with over 100 different process parameters, it's difficult to know which multivariable interaction to focus on, but AI is very good at looking at these numbers and these trends. So the results provided possibilities that the team is now diving into. So each of these parameters they were reviewed at the beginning, but nothing seemed unusual from a high level, just kind of glancing over everything. But now we're being told that there's probably something interacting between this narrow list of parameters. So the team is more focused in trying to see what exactly happened now that they're pretty sure something did happen with the parameters because the AI model pointed it out. So there's a trust in the model, and now they're diving deeper into that data that was just part of that broad review at the beginning. But now that they know something's there, you look at it differently when you know something's there.
Yes. The AI results brought some light about the granulation process we analyzed. How important is, from your perspective, the visualization and the explanation of the AI outputs?
So the end users, in this case for our engineers, our process experts, so no AI experience, but they still need to be able to have a general understanding of the AI models if they're to trust it and use it. So knowing that this was their first time interacting with it, none of them would be able to explain the details of AI, but they would be able to explain the high-level approach, which is good. And this high-level approach that we took is very similar to traditional statistics. We're just using different tools to narrow in and look at the trends on the data. So having the model and visualizations explained and made available to us made it understandable for someone who has never seen an AI model before to feel like they know what's going on and can trust the process. So this definitely strengthened the trust in the approach.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. And finally, the last question, Matt. Considering the effort invested in this experience applying AI, do you think that the journey has been positive? And would you and your team like to move forward going beyond this initial approach? And finally, what would you improve in the next iteration?
So the journey's definitely been positive. A team of process engineers is usually excited to be part of a new approach and new tools. Everyone hears about AI, and for them to be able to use it was pretty exciting and to be able to see it in action. So definitely a positive experience. In this case, we are trying to solve a very specific business problem. So if we're able to identify that root cause from what the model suggested, it'll be much easier to suggest AI for future cases where traditional approaches failed. we now have a better understanding of how physical clustering and differences between lines can impact the model. So for future iterations, I would remove that type of equipment bias so that the model can truly focus on what happened on a specific line when we're looking at a specific issue. So that would be the lesson learned for the next iteration.
Thank you so much, Matt, for your support in this interview and to participate in this journey. I hope that you enjoyed, because the AI in operations team has enjoyed a lot during this journey.
Oh, absolutely.
And I hope that we can move forward in the next iteration, next year. So see you soon and see you in the AI Summit. Bye.
Yep, see you there.